The city was built on water. Not near water, not beside water. On water, in the middle of a lake, connected to the shore by 3 long causeways. A city of 200,000 people rising from the surface of Lake Texcoco like something that an engineer with no experience of practical limitations might have drawn on paper and then actually built. Tenochtitlan, the Aztec capital, the largest city in the Western Hemisphere in 1500, and one of the largest cities on Earth. When Hernán Cortés first saw it on November 8, 1519, from the causeway that stretched across the lake toward the city, he sent a letter to the King of Spain that could not keep the astonishment out of its careful diplomatic prose. His soldiers, many of them veterans of campaigns in Cuba and the Caribbean, had never seen anything like it. Some of them said afterward that they thought they were dreaming. They were not dreaming. Tenochtitlan was real. It was also, and this is what tonight is about, a place that fed itself. Not simply fed itself, fed 200,000 people every day from a city built on a lake with no surrounding farmland in the conventional sense, in a climate that was high altitude and dry, using technologies that the Spanish, who had seen many cities, had never imagined. How it fed itself is one of the great organizational and agricultural achievements of the pre-Columbian Americas. And we're going to spend tonight inside it. Welcome to Dull Tales. Tonight we're going to a city that no longer exists in its original form, a city that was dismantled, flooded, and built over by the city that replaced it, which is now Mexico City. The lake is largely drained. The causeways are city streets. The great temple, the Templo Mayor, was discovered under the streets of the old city in the 1970s when a construction crew hit the foundations. But in 1500, it was there. All of it. Before we go in, subscribe if Dull Tales is your evening company. Leave a comment, tell me where you're listening from, tell me if you've been to Mexico City, tell me if you've visited the Templo Mayor Museum. Let me ask you a few things first. What did Tenochtitlan's food system actually look like? Where did 200,000 people's food come from if the city was built on a lake? What were the chinampas, the floating gardens, and how did they actually work? Were they really floating? Were they as productive as the accounts claim? What did the Aztec market at Tlatelolco look like? And why did the Spanish, who had seen the markets of Seville and Constantinople and Rome, say it was the most impressive market they had ever seen? What was the specific daily experience of a market vendor or a chinampa farmer in Tenochtitlan? What did their day look like, from before dawn to the market stall to the return in the evening? And the question that hangs over all of this, what happened? The city that fed itself so extraordinarily, that had worked out how to feed 200,000 people on a lake, was gone within 2 years of Cortés's first visit. What does the encounter between the world that could do this and the world that destroyed it actually mean? Tonight we find out. Congratulations! You've just woken up in Tenochtitlan on a morning in approximately 1500. The sun is rising over the mountains to the east. The lake is calm. Somewhere on the water, a farmer is already on his way to the chinampa. The market at Tlatelolco opens in a few hours. 200,000 people are beginning their day. Let's go in. Let me start with the lake. Because the lake is the beginning of everything. Lake Texcoco in 1500 was a shallow lake in the middle of the Valley of Mexico, the high plateau surrounded by mountains that would eventually become the location of Mexico City. The altitude was approximately 2,200 meters above sea level. The climate was high and dry, not tropical, not the jungle that European imaginations associated with Mesoamerica, but cool and arid, with a rainy season from June to October and a dry season the rest of the year. The lake was shallow, typically 1 to 2 meters in most areas, deeper in some channels, and it was brackish, particularly in the southern portions, where the lake was fed by drainage from the surrounding salted soils. The northern portions were fresher, fed by springs and rivers from the mountains. In the middle of the lake, in one of the fresher western sections, was an island, or rather, what had been an island and had become, through centuries of gradual modification, the island city of Tenochtitlan. The city that the Aztecs built on this island was connected to the shore by three main causeways: the southern causeway running to Iztapalapa, the northern causeway running to Tepeyac, and the western causeway running to Tacuba. These causeways were wide enough for several people to walk abreast, and they were the primary arteries of movement between the island city and the inland. They were also the primary arteries of food delivery. Every morning, the canoes and the porters came in from the surrounding regions, bringing the food that the city required. This is the specific fact about Tenochtitlan's food system that changes everything. The city could not feed itself from its own territory. It was too dense, too built up, too waterlogged for conventional agriculture within its walls. The food had to come in. What was remarkable was how it came in, and from where, and in what quantities, and with what organizational sophistication. Let me give you a woman named Citlali. She was 32 years old, and she was a chinampa farmer. Not the owner of the chinampa, she and her husband owned the chinampa jointly, in the way that Aztec agricultural units were typically organized, as household production units with shared labor. But she was the one who knew the chinampa's specific character, which beds were most productive for which crops, which areas needed attention in which season, what the signs were of specific problems in the soil. She had inherited this knowledge from her mother, who had inherited it from her mother. She woke before dawn. Not because she had to, the chinampa would be there when the sun rose, but because the morning canoe traffic on the lake operated on a specific schedule, and the canal routes through the chinampa districts were less crowded before the main market traffic began, and she had learned over years of practice that the early morning hours were the hours in which the chinampa work was most efficient. She ate quickly. Maize tortillas from the previous day, reheated over the fire, beans, a small amount of chili, the specific compact meal that chinampa farmers ate before the day's work, designed to sustain the physical labor of the morning hours without being so heavy as to slow the body. Then the canoe. The Chinampa district, the extensive network of agricultural plots south of Tenochtitlan proper, was accessed primarily by canoe. The specific geography of the Chinampas made canoe travel the natural mode. The plots were separated by water channels, the canals ran between the Chinampa beds, and the movement of goods from the chinampa to the market was movement by water. She paddled. The morning was cold, the high-altitude cold of the Valley of Mexico before the sun had warmed the lake surface, the specific chill that the altitude produced even in what Tenochtitlan's calendar counted as the growing season. She paddled toward the chinampa. Let me tell you about the chinampa. Because the chinampa is the specific agricultural technology that made Tenochtitlan possible, and it is one of the more remarkable agricultural innovations in the history of human food production. The chinampa was, and in some surviving sections of the former Lake Texcoco district near Mexico City, still is, an agricultural plot created in the shallow lake by depositing layers of aquatic vegetation, mud, and organic matter to create a raised bed in the water. Not floating. This is the specific misconception that the term floating gardens creates. The chinampas were not floating. They were anchored either to the lake bottom by their accumulated depth or by the willow trees planted at their edges, whose roots secured the plot against the current and against erosion. The specific construction of a chinampa. You began by staking out the area with poles and reed fencing. You then deposited layers of aquatic weeds and mud dredged from the lake bottom, building up the bed until it rose above the waterline. You planted willow trees along the edges. Over time, the roots stabilized the structure. The result was a raised agricultural bed surrounded by water on all sides, accessible only by canoe. The chinampas had specific agricultural advantages that made them extraordinarily productive. The soil was lake-bottom mud, the richest possible substrate, organic, well supplied with minerals from the lake, replenished regularly by dredging from the surrounding water. The water table in the chinampa beds was perpetually at the root level. The surrounding water maintained the moisture that the crops needed without requiring irrigation in the conventional sense. The roots of the plants could reach water at all times. The specific combination of rich soil and constant moisture made chinampa agriculture capable of producing multiple crops per year, in a climate where conventional agriculture was more limited. 3 to 4 crops annually from the same chinampa bed. Maize, beans, squash, tomatoes, chili peppers, amaranth, chia, flowers for the market. The chinampa could grow all of these. And the specific rotation of crops through the growing seasons was one of the agricultural knowledges that Citlali and the other chinampa farmers had inherited and refined. The total area of chinampas in the Valley of Mexico at the time of the Spanish arrival was approximately 9,000 hectares. 9,000 hectares of the most productive agricultural land in the hemisphere, producing multiple crops per year, in a climate that conventional agriculture struggled with. This was the food system's foundation. Let me tell you about what the chinampas grew and where it went. Because the chinampas production was not for the farmer's own consumption primarily, it was for the market. The specific organization of Aztec food production was market-oriented in a way that distinguished it from many other pre-colonial agricultural systems. The chinampa farmers grew for sale. The specific commercial orientation of their production meant that the chinampas were producing not just subsistence crops but market crops, and the market at Tlatelolco was where that production ended up. Citlali's chinampa produced, in the current season, tomatoes, the specific small tomatoes of the Mesoamerican tradition, not the large European tomatoes that later crossbreeding produced, but the specific tomatillos and small red tomatoes that were essential to Aztec cooking. Chili peppers, multiple varieties, the specific cultivation of different heat and flavor profiles that the Aztec culinary tradition required. Flowers, specifically flowers for the offering markets around the temple complex, the significant ritual economy that the religious life of Tenochtitlan sustained. Squash, the specific varieties of cucurbita that the Aztec agricultural tradition had developed, valuable both for their flesh and for their seeds. The morning of the market day, she harvested what was ready. Not everything. The chinampa's crops were in different stages of readiness at different times, and the skilled chinampa farmer harvested with the specific knowledge of what the market needed and what the chinampa could provide without exhausting itself. She loaded the canoe. She paddled toward the market district. Let me give you the market. The market at Tlatelolco, the sister city of Tenochtitlan on the same island, the specific commercial center that the Aztec capital organized its trade around, was by the accounts of the Spanish observers who saw it one of the most impressive commercial establishments in the world they knew. Cortés himself estimated 60,000 people passing through it daily. Other estimates went higher. The specific scale, the physical size of the market plaza, the organization of its goods by category, the specific administration of the market's operations, was unlike anything the Spanish had seen in Europe. The Templo Mayor, the great twin pyramid that dominated Tenochtitlan's ceremonial center, was visible from most of the island. The market at Tlatelolco was visible and audible from a significant distance. The specific crowd noise, the calls of the vendors, the movement of tens of thousands of people in a commercial space, produced a sound that the approaching visitor heard before they saw the market. Let me take you inside. The market was organized by product type. Not randomly. The specific organization of the Tlatelolco market was such that the sellers of each type of good occupied a specific section of the market, making it possible for a buyer to navigate to what they needed directly. Gold and silver and featherwork, the luxury goods section, in one area. Cloth and finished clothing in another. Food, raw and cooked, in a substantial section that occupied a large portion of the market. Live animals, dogs, turkeys, deer, in another area. Medicinal plants and herbs. Tools and implements. Slaves, who were a significant category of goods in the Aztec market system. Ceramic goods. Wood and charcoal for fuel. The food section was the largest and the busiest. Let me give you the food in the market. Because the specific variety of food available at Tlatelolco was one of the more astonishing features of the market for the Spanish observers, and it tells you something important about the sophistication of Tenochtitlan's food system. The cooked food vendors. The specific memory that the Spanish observers most consistently recorded about the Tlatelolco market was not the gold or the featherwork or the administrative sophistication. It was the cooked food. The market had a substantial number of sellers of prepared food, the specific antecedents of what we would now call street food, the vendors who cooked on the spot or who brought prepared food from their households to sell in the market. Tamales, the maize dough stuffed with various fillings, wrapped in husks and steamed, were sold in enormous variety. Different sizes, different fillings, different regional preparations. Tortillas of different types. Stews and porridges of various kinds. Chocolate, the specifically valuable drink made from cacao beans that was associated with status and ceremony in Aztec culture, but that was also available commercially in the market. Pulque, the fermented beverage made from the agave plant, the specific Mesoamerican fermented drink that served some of the social functions that ale served in medieval Europe. Insects. The specific role of insects in the Aztec diet is one of the aspects of the cuisine that the Spanish found most remarkable. Grasshoppers, lake flies, various larvae, these were protein sources that the chinampa-based agricultural system produced in abundance from the lake and its surrounding environment, and they were present in the Tlatelolco market as ordinary food, not as exotic curiosity. Amaranth. The protein-rich grain that was one of the primary agricultural products of the Aztec system, used in both food and ceremonial context. The specific tamales made from amaranth dough for ritual occasions were one of the foods that the Spanish, for religious reasons related to the ceremony's association with Aztec religion, would eventually attempt to suppress. The variety of food available at Tlatelolco in 1500 was extraordinary. Not just variety in the sense of different preparations of the same ingredient. Genuine variety, the specific diversity of the Mesoamerican culinary tradition, which had developed over centuries of agricultural innovation and cultural exchange across the different ecological zones of Mexico, and which the market brought together in one space. Let me give you the market's organization in more detail. Because the market at Tlatelolco was not merely a large space where people sold things. It was an organized commercial institution with specific administrative structures that ensured fair dealing and managed the specific problems of large-scale commerce. The market judges. Tenochtitlan's market system included specific market inspectors, officials who moved through the market assessing the quality of goods, the fairness of measures and weights, the behavior of the traders. The specific function of the market judges was to prevent fraud, the short measure, the adulterated goods, the misrepresentation of quality that any large market developed without enforcement. The market judges were known. The sellers knew who they were. The specific accountability that their presence created was one of the market's organizing features. The cacao bean was the primary currency. The Aztec economy used cacao beans as a medium of exchange. Not exclusively. There were other media including cloth, copper axes, and various other standardized goods. But cacao beans were the specific small denomination currency that ordinary transactions were conducted in. The specific counting of cacao beans, assessing their quality, counting out specific quantities, managing the exchange, was one of the specific skills that the market's participants developed. The fraud in cacao beans was documented. The specific filling of cacao bean husks with clay to increase their weight, the substitution of inferior beans for quality beans. The market judges were specifically on watch for this. The market operated on a specific 5-day cycle. The Aztec week was 5 days, and the major market days occurred on specific days in the cycle. The smaller markets happened more frequently, but the major Tlatelolco market, which drew traders from across the region, had its specific rhythm. On major market days, tens of thousands of people, from the city itself, from the surrounding regions, connected to the city by the causeways and the canoe routes. From even further afield, the long-distance traders who moved goods from distant ecological zones, the coastal products, the highland products, the specific goods of the different climate zones, into the Tlatelolco market. Let me give you the long-distance traders. Because Tenochtitlan's food system was not only the chinampas and the local production. It was embedded in a trade network that reached across Mexico, and the long-distance traders, the Pachteca, were the specific people who maintained that network. The Pachteca were a specific professional class in Aztec society, merchants whose trade operated at a different scale from the ordinary market vendor. They organized expeditions to distant regions, traded the luxury goods that the Aztec elite required, feathers, jade, exotic skins, gold, for the specific products of those regions, and returned to Tenochtitlan with goods that the local production could not provide. They were also, in a specific combination of commercial and political function, intelligence gatherers for the Aztec state. The specific information about distant regions that they acquired in their travels was valuable to the military and political planning of the empire. The Pachteca had their own specific neighborhoods in Tenochtitlan, their own gods, their own feast days, their own social organization. They were a guild, in the specific sense of a hereditary professional organization with its own internal hierarchy and its own specific rituals. The food system's longdi. Stance dimension. The Pachteca brought cacao from the lowland zones. Cacao does not grow at Tenochtitlan's altitude. They brought specific spices and condiments from coastal regions. They brought the variety of materials that made the Tlatelolco market stock so diverse. The local chinampas produced the bulk of the food. The Pachteca produced the diversity. Let me now give you a vendor at the market. His name was Itzcoatl, the snake with an obsidian skin, a name that sounds more ominous than his daily life warranted. He was 25 years old, and he sold cooked food. Specifically, tamales. He had been making tamales since he was old enough to help his mother, who had sold tamales at the market before him. The specific knowledge of the filling combinations, the specific texture of the dough, the specific technique of the wrapping and the steaming. This was knowledge he had in his hands as fully as a chinampa farmer had the knowledge of the soil. He arrived at the market before dawn. The setup of the food vendor's stall was its own specific process. The preparation of the cooking equipment, the specific clay pots, and the small braziers that maintained heat without full fires, the arrangement of the prepared tamales that had been made the night before, the setup of the display in the specific way that attracted buyers at the market. He knew where his spot was. The specific market spots in Tlatelolco were, by all accounts, assigned either by heredity, by purchase, or by the market administration. Itzcoatl's spot had been his mother's before it was his. He knew the other vendors around him. He knew their products. He knew which buyers were regulars. The market opened. The people came. He sold tamales. The specific commercial rhythm of a food vendor's market day. The early rush when the people who came to buy for the day's household consumption arrived. The midday period when the people coming through the market stopped to eat prepared food. The later afternoon when the traffic thinned and the remaining stock needed to be managed. He sold from before dawn until mid-afternoon. He sold most of what he had brought. He counted his cacao beans. He went home. He made more tamales. Let me tell you about the water system. Because Tenochtitlan's water system was one of the city's most impressive engineering achievements, and it shaped the daily life of every one of the city's 200,000 inhabitants. The specific water challenge of Tenochtitlan. The lake water was brackish in many areas, not suitable for drinking. The city needed fresh water. The solution: 2 aqueducts. The aqueducts of Tenochtitlan were not the single-pipe affairs of some popular imagination. They were large-scale engineering projects, double-chambered pipes running along the causeways from the freshwater springs on the mainland to the city. The double-chamber system. One chamber carried fresh water into the city while the other was being cleaned. The chambers alternated so that one was always in service. This was a specific maintenance innovation, aqueducts that could be cleaned and repaired while still providing continuous water supply. The water was distributed within the city by canoe water sellers who collected fresh water from the aqueduct distribution points and paddled it through the city's canal system to deliver to households and businesses. The canals of Tenochtitlan were the streets. The city was organized, as Venice would be organized somewhat later and somewhat differently, around a network of canals that were the primary arteries of movement and commerce. The causeways to the mainland were solid land. The interior streets were water. This specific geography meant that the daily life of Tenochtitlan was organized differently from the daily life of a land-based city. Movement was by canoe. The sounds of the morning were the sounds of paddles in water. The traffic jams, and Tenochtitlan had them, in the canal system during the busy hours of the market, were canoe traffic jams. Let me give you the morning of the city. Not the chinampa farmer, not the market vendor, the city itself, in the hour before the market opened. Tenochtitlan at dawn. The mountains in the east, the specific profile of the volcanoes Popocatépetl and Ixcuatl, visible from the lake on clear mornings, the specific backdrop against which the city's silhouette appeared, were lit by the first sun. The lake was still. The canoe traffic was building, the chinampa farmers from the south, the traders from the mainland coming across the causeways, the water sellers beginning their rounds, the specific human traffic of a city starting its day. The Templo Mayor, the great twin pyramid at the city center, was visible from all points in the city. The specific presence of the pyramid, its scale, its color, the original was painted in vivid reds and whites, not the gray stone of the ruins. Its position at the ceremonial center organized the visual world of the city's inhabitants in the way that a cathedral organizes the visual world of a European city. It was religious. It was also civic. The Templo Mayor was the center around which Tenochtitlan organized itself, the orientation point, the visible landmark, the specific location of the ceremonies that organized the Aztec calendar and the Aztec state's relationship with the divine. The priests were on the pyramid at dawn. The specific ceremonies of the dawn, the first light of the sun welcomed with specific ritual at the top of the pyramid, were the opening of the city's day. Smoke from the temple. Drums. The specific sounds of the Aztec morning. The canoes moving on the water. The market beginning. 200,000 people. Let me give you what the city ate. Because the specific diet of Tenochtitlan's population, is one of the more interesting aspects of the city's food system, and it tells you something about the relationship between the agricultural system and the population it fed. The base maize. Maize corn was the caloric foundation of the Aztec diet. It was consumed primarily as tortillas and tamales, the specific ground dough preparations that the nixtamalization process made nutritionally complete. Nixtamalization, the process of soaking and cooking dried maize in an alkaline solution, typically lime water, was a Mesoamerican innovation of considerable nutritional significance. It releases the niacin in the maize that untreated maize does not provide, making maize a nutritionally complete food rather than a niacin-deficient one. The Europeans who adopted maize from the Americas did not adopt nixtamalization. The result, centuries later, was the specific pellagra epidemics, the niacin deficiency disease, that affected maize-eating populations in Europe and Africa who were eating untreated maize. The Aztecs had worked out the chemistry without the chemistry. The secondary staples, beans and squash, the specific Mesoamerican agricultural combination of maize, beans, and squash, the three sisters, as later agricultural tradition would call them, was not only an agricultural system but a nutritional system. Maize and beans together provide a complete amino acid profile. The squash provided additional nutrition. The three crops grown together were a nutritionally balanced package. Protein beyond beans. Insects, fish from the lake, turkey, dog, the specific breed kept specifically for eating, occasional deer and other game. Chocolate, available commercially, associated with status but present in the market. Chili, present in virtually everything. Salt, traded in from the lake's saline southern sections, essential. The specific flavors of the Aztec diet, the maize, the bean, the chili, the tomato, are recognizable. They are the flavors of Mexican cooking today, the specific culinary inheritance of the Mesoamerican tradition. The conquest changed many things. The food was not one of them. Not entirely. The specific maize-bean-chili-tomato combination is still the basis of Mexican cuisine, still produced from some of the same agricultural traditions, still eaten daily by the descendants of the people who ate it in Tenochtitlan in 1500. Let me give you the market in full detail now. 60,000 people in a day. Some estimates go higher. The specific scale of the Tlatelolco market was such that Bernal Díaz del Castillo, one of Cortés's soldiers who wrote his own account of the conquest, decades later, described the market with an astonishment that even the passage of decades had not dimmed. He described having walked through the markets of Constantinople, of Rome, of the great cities of Europe. He said Tlatelolco was larger. He said Tlatelolco was more organized. He said the sheer variety of what was sold there exceeded anything he had seen. The specific categories of goods he enumerated in his account: gold, silver, precious stones, feathers, mantles, and embroideries; men's and women's clothing, sandals; herbs, plants, medicines in another section; all kinds of cloth and thread; cacao and everything that could be made with it; fish of the lake fresh and dried; poultry and waterfowl of many types; rabbits, deer, and small animals; pottery of all descriptions; charcoal and firewood. And then, and this is where Diaz becomes specifically enthusiastic, the cooked food. The specific variety of cooked food available at Tlatelolco, the tamales and the tortillas and the stews and the prepared dishes of multiple kinds, available hot at the market for immediate consumption. He was impressed by the quality. He was a soldier who had been eating campaign food for months. He was very impressed by the quality. Let me now give you the end that was coming. Because this specific world, this extraordinary food system, this organized market, this city of 200,000 sand built on a lake, was about to end, and the specific way it ended deserves attention. Cortés arrived in 1519. Moctezuma II, the Aztec emperor, received him. The specific political and military situation that followed, the alliances Cortés built with the peoples who resented Aztec domination, the imprisonment of Moctezuma, the Noche Triste when the Spanish were driven out of the city, the eventual siege, was the specific series of events that ended Tenochtitlan. The siege of Tenochtitlan lasted from May to August 1521. The Spanish and their indigenous allies cut the causeways. They cut the aqueducts. The city was cut off from its food supply and its water supply simultaneously. The chinampas were in the lake. The canoe routes were controlled by the Spanish. The market at Tlatelolco continued as long as it could. And then it couldn't. The city fell on August 13, 1521. Cuauhtemoctzin, the last Aztec emperor, was captured. The city was systematically demolished. The stones of the Templo Mayor were used to build the Cathedral of Mexico City. The lake was gradually drained over the following centuries. The canals were filled in. The causeways became streets. The chinampas, those that survived, are now the specific area called Xochimilco, south of Mexico City, where you can still ride a flat-bottomed boat through the remaining chinampa channels and see the remnants of the agricultural system. The market at Tlatelolco is now a public square. The Templo Mayor's ruins are in the middle of the city, surrounded by streets with a museum beside them. Mexico City is built on the filled-in lake. It is one of the world's largest cities. It is sinking slowly into the lake bed because the specific weight of a metropolitan area of 20 million people on a drained lake bed produces subsidence. The city built on water. Unmade. Rebuilt. Sinking. Let me give you the food system's full picture. Because I have given you the chinampa and the market, but the full picture requires more. The tribute system. The Aztec Empire at its peak in 1500 controlled a significant portion of central Mexico, and the tribute that the empire extracted from its subject peoples was a significant part of Tenochtitlan's food supply. The specific tribute records that survive, the Matricula de Tributos and the Mendoza Codex, document the enormous quantities of goods that flowed into Tenochtitlan from across the empire. Maize, beans, chili, cacao, cloth, luxury goods, labor, all of it flowing into the capital on a regular tribute schedule. The tribute was organized, recorded, managed. The specific administrative machinery of the Aztec state's tribute collection was one of the most sophisticated fiscal systems in the pre-Columbian Americas. It fed the capital. It fed the army. It fed the temple complex and its priests. It fed the administrative class. The chinampa farmers and the local market fed the ordinary population. The tribute fed the state and its functions. Both were necessary. The food system of Tenochtitlan was not one system. It was several systems working together. The chinampa production for the market, the long-distance Pachteca trade for specialized goods, the tribute from the empire for state functions, and the local hunting and fishing and lake food gathering that supplemented everything else. The specific complexity of this multi-system food supply for a city of 200,000 is one of the organizational achievements of Aztec civilization that the narrative of conquest tends to obscure. Let me now give you Citlali's afternoon. She had sold her morning harvest at the market. The specific negotiation of the market, the pricing of the goods, the assessment of the cacao beans she received in payment, the management of the transaction in the market's commercial environment was done. She had a good morning. The tomatoes had sold well. The season was right. The supply from other chinampa farmers was not yet at its peak, and the price reflected this. The flowers had sold at the specific market rate for offering flowers in the period between the major festivals, not the premium of the festival period, but adequate. She counted her cacao beans. She considered what she needed. She bought in the market specific goods that the chinampa did not produce. Salt, the essential condiment, and preservative that the freshwater chinampa could not produce. A specific type of dried chili that the market vendor near her usual spot specialized in, from a coastal region, different in flavor from the chilies she grew herself. New sandals. Her current ones had worn through in a way that needed addressing before the rainy season made them useless. She paddled home. The afternoon light on the lake was different from the morning light, warmer, the specific quality of afternoon on the high plateau, the mountains in the background still snow-capped even in the growing season. She arrived at the chinampa. The plants that had not been harvested in the morning needed attention, a specific pest that had been appearing on the squash leaves, the specific management of the chinampa's ongoing growing conditions. She worked. She ate. The evening meal, beans with chili, tortillas from the morning's production, a small amount of dried fish. She slept. She woke before dawn. She went to the chinampa. This was the day. Every day. This was the specific daily existence that fed 200,000 people. Let me give you the lake's specific ecology. Because the lake was not simply the medium in which the city was built. It was a food source of its own, with a specific ecology that the Aztec food system had learned to use. Lake Texcoco and its connected lakes. The lake system was actually 5 connected lakes, contained specific fish species. The axolotl, the specific salamander that is now endangered but was then abundant, was a food source. The lake supported populations of waterfowl that were hunted for food. The spirulina algae that grew on the lake's surface, which the Aztecs harvested, dried into cakes, and sold in the market, was a protein and nutrient-dense food source. The lake flies. The specific lake fly larvae, the Ixcuatl, were harvested from the lake's surface and pressed into cakes that were sold in the Tlatelolco market. The specific flavor was described as similar to fish eggs. They were a protein source that the lake produced in abundance. The lake's ecology was a food system of its own, supplementing the chinampa production and the tribute supply with the specific foods that the lake environment uniquely produced. The Aztec food system was not just the chinampas. It was the chinampas, and the lake and the trade and the tribute, and the market that organized all of it. Let me give you the Aztec calendar's relationship with food. Because the Aztec calendar, one of the most sophisticated calendar systems in the pre-Columbian Americas, organized not just time, but the agricultural and ritual cycle that the food system depended on. The Aztec calendar was 2 interlocking cycles, the 365-day solar calendar, which organized the agricultural year, and the 260-day ritual calendar, which organized the religious and ceremonial year. The interaction of these 2 cycles produced a specific 52-year cycle that organized the longer rhythms of Aztec time. The agricultural calendar was specific in its relationship to the food system. Different periods of the year were associated with specific agricultural activities. The planting, the growing, the harvest, and the ceremonies associated with each period were ceremonies that connected the agricultural cycle to the divine. The rain deity Tlaloc was one of the most important in the Aztec pantheon, the deity of rain and water, whose favor was essential for agricultural success. The specific ceremonies that petitioned Tlaloc for rain were among the most important in the calendar, and their timing was organized around the agricultural season. The harvest ceremonies were celebrations of the food system's success. The specific foods, the first maize of the new harvest, the specific tamales made for the ritual occasion, were the material expression of the agricultural cycle's completion. The food was not separate from the religion. It was embedded in it. The chinampa farmer who grew the maize also participated in the ceremonies that petitioned for the rain that the maize needed. The market vendor who sold the ritual tamales was producing a commercial good that was also a ritual offering. The food system and the religious system were not two systems. They were one. Sleep now. You have been in Tenochtitlan tonight. In Citlali's canoe before dawn. In the chinampa, the specific knowledge of the soil in her hands. In the market at Tlatelolco, the 60,000 people and the tamales and the cacao beans and the flowers and the obsidian and the pachtekas, exotic goods from distant regions. In Itzcoatl's stall, the tamales sold, the cacao counted. In the lake at sunset, the mountains visible, the water calm. In the food system, that fed 200,000 people from a lake. The city is gone. The specific extraordinary achievement, the chinampas, the market, the aqueducts, the canal system, the food supply of a city the size of the largest European cities of the same period, is gone in its original form. What remains? The chinampas at Xochimilco, where you can still ride a boat through the channels. The Templo Mayor, excavated from under the streets, its museum open to visitors. The food, the maize and the beans and the chili and the tomato and the chocolate that are still the foundation of the cuisine that came from this place. And the knowledge, the specific agricultural knowledge that the chinampa farmers developed and refined over centuries, the knowledge of how to grow from the lake, how to manage the soil's fertility, how to produce multiple harvests from the same bed. This knowledge survived in fragments in practice, in the people who maintained the chinampas at Xochimilco, in the people who are now studying it as a model for sustainable agriculture. The city fell. The food knowledge persisted. Sleep. The lake is mostly drained. But the chinampas are still there. Good night. Thank you for tonight. Tenochtitlan is one of the great lost cities of the world, not lost in the sense of being forgotten, but lost in the sense of being buried, dismantled, built over. The specific extraordinary civilization that produced it deserves more attention than the narrative of conquest typically gives it. Subscribe if dull tales is your evening company. Leave a comment, tell me if you've been to Mexico City, if you've visited Xochimilco, if you've eaten at a market stall that descended, however distantly, from the tradition of Tlatelolco. Next time, the Victorian servants, the people who ran the great houses of Victorian England, upstairs and downstairs, and what that world looked like from the inside. But tonight, the lake, the chinampa, the market, the tamales, the cacao beans. Good night. Let me give you more of the city's specific physical world. Because Tenochtitlan's physical layout was one of its most distinctive features, and understanding the layout changes how you understand the daily life. The city was organized around 4 quarters, the 4 Cuauhtemoctzin radiating from the central ceremonial precinct where the Templo Mayor stood. The 4 quarters were Cuauhtemoctzin, the flower place, to the northwest. Aztec, the house of herons, to the northeast. Moyatlan, the place of mosquito, to the southwest. Tiapan, the divine place, to the southeast. Each quarter had its own administrative organization, its own local temples, its own specific character based on the trades and activities concentrated there. The organization was not only physical, it was social and political. The Cuauhtemoctzin were the primary social units of Aztec urban life, the specific community organizations that managed the distribution of land, the assignment of tribute obligations, the local administration of justice and ceremony. The Cuauhtemoctzin you belonged to was your primary social identity. Not your occupation, not your family, your Cuauhtemoctzin. Citlali's Cuauhtemoctzin was in the southern quarter closest to the Chinampa district. She was a Chinampa farmer by occupation, and her Cuauhtemoctzin was organized significantly around the Chinampa farming trade, the shared infrastructure, the shared knowledge, the specific community organization around the production system they all depended on. Itzcoatl's cowpally was in the market district. His family had sold food in the Tlatelolco market for generations, and the cowpally was organized around this commercial tradition. The cowpally maintained the local temple. The cowpally organized the education of children, the specific schools, the Tumpline for the ordinary students and the Kamikak for the elite, were organized at the cowpally level. The cowpally was the city's social foundation. 200,000 people, organized into Cuauhtemoctzin, organized into 4 quarters, organized around the central pyramid. Let me tell you about the Aztec marketplace's specific price system. Because the market was not a place where prices were simply whatever the seller wanted to charge. It was an organized commercial system with specific price conventions, specific standards of measure, and specific enforcement. The cacao bean standard. The cacao bean was the basic unit of commercial exchange in the Tlatelolco market, but the relationship between cacao beans and goods was not simply barter. It was a price system, specific numbers of cacao beans for specific quantities of specific goods, conventions that were known to the market participants and enforced by the market judges. A small tomato, 1 or 2 cacao beans. A turkey. Various accounts give different numbers, but the range suggests approximately 100 cacao beans for a turkey of specified quality. The larger denominations. Quetzalli, the specific standardized length of cotton cloth that served as a higher value currency for larger transactions. A quetzalli was approximately 65 cacao beans in value, by some accounts. The specific exchange rate varied. The market had, in other words, a currency hierarchy. Cacao beans for small transactions, quetzalli for larger ones, and gold dust or copper axes for very large transactions. This was a functioning monetary system. Not a coin-based system in the European sense, but a functioning system of standardized exchange media with specific values enforced by the market's administrative structure. Let me give you the Templo Mayor, because I have mentioned it repeatedly as the organizing visual and ceremonial feature of Tenochtitlan, and it deserves its own full attention. The Templo Mayor, the Great Temple, was the twin pyramid structure at the center of Tenochtitlan's ceremonial precinct. Twin pyramids, one dedicated to Huitzilopochtli, the sun and war deity, and one dedicated to Tlaloc, the rain deity. The 2 shrines at the top were the high points of the city's religious life. The pyramid rose in stages. There were at least 7 different building phases documented by the archaeologists who excavated it, each layer encasing the previous one, as the temple was periodically rebuilt and enlarged. The specific experience of the Templo Mayor from the city, it was impossible to avoid. From any point in Tenochtitlan, the pyramid was visible. The specific orientation of the city meant that wherever you were in the Chinampa district to the south, at the market in Tlatelolco to the north, in the residential quarters to the east and west, the pyramid was there on the skyline. At dawn, the first sunlight on the twin shrines. At ceremonial moments, the smoke of the offerings rising from the top. The drums. The specific sound of the temple drums, the Itzcoatl and the Teponaztli, was audible throughout the city on ceremonial days. The sound was the specific temporal marker of the religious calendar, the sound that organized the city's ritual life. The temple complex around the Templo Mayor. The specific buildings associated with the various deities, the schools for the priests, the ball court where the specific rubber ball game with its specific cosmological significance was played. The ball game. The Ulamalisli, the rubber ball game played on the eye-shaped court, was one of the most distinctive features of Mesoamerican culture. The specific rubber ball, the specific court, the specific rules, these were present at the Templo Mayor, and at the ball courts throughout Tenochtitlan. The game had cosmological significance. The ball's movement represented celestial bodies. It was also a game. People watched it. People had favorites. The specific combination of the cosmological and the recreational that the ball game represented is one of the more human features of the Aztec cultural world. Let me give you the specific social hierarchy. Because the food system operated within a social hierarchy that shaped who ate what and who had access to what. The Tlatelolco, the Aztec emperor, Moctezuma II in our period, sat at the top of the social hierarchy. His household consumed a specific share of the tribute and the market's best goods. The specific daily menu of the imperial household was documented by the Spanish observers. Hundreds of dishes prepared and presented, the chocolate drunk from gold cups, the specific display of abundance that was part of the ruler's power. The pili, the nobility, occupied the next tier. They had specific rights to land, to tribute labor, to particular foods and goods. Their diet was more varied than the commoners, and they had access to the luxury goods that the Pachteca brought from distant regions. The Macehualtan, the commoners, the majority of the population, were the people who actually produced most of the city's food. The chinampa farmers, the market vendors, the artisans, the ordinary working population. Their diet was the maize and beans diet that the chinampa system and the tribute system made available to the broad population. The Tlatelolco, the indentured workers, were people in a form of debt or obligation service, not enslaved in the hereditary sense, but temporarily unfree. Their diet was the minimum. The Tlatelolcan, the enslaved, were at the bottom, and they were also sold in the Tlatelolco market, in the specific part of the market designated for that commerce. The hierarchy was real. The food system fed all of it, in different quantities and with different qualities. Let me give you the education system. Because Tenochtitlan had a specific educational system that was one of the distinctive features of Aztec civilization, and that shaped how the city's food-producing population understood their world and their work. The Tulpachcali, the House of Youth, was the school for ordinary children. Both boys and girls attended. The curriculum was not academic in the narrow sense. It included the specific practical knowledge of the adult world the children were being prepared for, combined with the ritual and ceremonial knowledge that organized the Aztec cultural life. Boys learned the handling of weapons, the specific physical practices of the warrior tradition, the ceremonial obligations of male adult life. Girls learned the domestic arts, including the specific weaving traditions that produced the cloth that was both everyday clothing and a medium of exchange, the household rituals. Both learned the calendar, the ceremony, the specific worldview that organized Aztec life. The Comicac, the elite school, trained the sons of the nobility and the sons of especially gifted commoners for the priesthood and for the administrative positions of the state. The Comicac produced the scribes who maintained the pictographic records. The Comicac produced the calendar specialists. The Comicac produced the Pachteca leaders. The Tulpachcali produced the farmers and the warriors and the market vendors. Both were required. Let me give you the specific experience of the canal system. Because the canals were the streets, and walking through the city was paddling through the city, and the specific experience of moving through Tenochtitlan by canoe was unlike the experience of moving through any European city of the period. The canal system was organized with the specific geometry of the planned city, the major canals running in cardinal directions, connecting the main causeways, with subsidiary canals running between the buildings in the residential and commercial quarters. The canals were busy, not just with goods traffic, the goods coming in from the chinampa districts and the mainland arriving by the major canals, but with the people traffic of a city of 200,000 going about their daily lives by water. The specific sounds of the canal system, the paddles in the water, the calls of the vendors who operated on the canals, the specific sounds of a water traffic city. The canals were also the sewage system. The specific management of human waste in a city of 200,000 built on a lake was one of the organizational challenges that the Aztec administration addressed with a specific approach. Canoes designated for waste collection. The human waste collected and carried to specific points where it was used as fertilizer on the chinampas. This closed-loop system, the waste of the city returning to the agricultural land that fed it, was one of the more sophisticated features of the Tenochtitlan food system. The city's waste was the chinampas' fertilizer. The chinampas' food fed the city. The cycle was closed. Let me give you the comparison to European cities, because the scale comparison is important for understanding what Tenochtitlan was. London in 1500, approximately 50,000 to 75,000 people. Paris in 1500, approximately 100,000 people. Tenochtitlan in 1500, 200,000 to 300,000 by various estimates. Tenochtitlan was significantly larger than any city in Europe at the time of the Spanish arrival. The largest European city of 1500 was Naples, with approximately 200,000 people. Constantinople was comparable. London and Paris were significantly smaller. The Spanish soldiers who first saw Tenochtitlan were not provincial visitors from a small culture. They were men who had seen Seville, seen the great cities of Spain and the Mediterranean. Cortés himself was educated, sophisticated, aware of the world. They were astonished. They said so. The specific astonishment of the Spanish observers at Tenochtitlan's scale and organization is one of the most historically significant reactions to an encounter between civilizations. Not the astonishment of the parochial encountering the wider world, the astonishment of people who knew the wider world encountering something that exceeded their framework. The city was larger than what they knew. The market was better organized than what they knew. The food system was more sophisticated than what they knew. They were astonished. And then they destroyed it. This is the specific tragedy of the encounter. The civilization that was astonishing enough to astonish sophisticated observers was destroyed within 2 years of their arrival. Let me give you the specific end more fully. Because the end of Tenochtitlan was not simply a military event. It was a specific destruction of a specific civilization, and it deserves more than a mention. The siege of 1521 lasted 75 days. The Spanish and their Tlaxcalan allies. The Tlaxcalans were a people who had maintained independence from the Aztec Empire and who allied with the Spanish against the Aztecs, cut the causeways, cut the aqueducts, controlled the lake. The city of 200,000, cut off from its food supply and its water supply, began to die. Not immediately. The chinampa farmers continued to try to work. The market at Tlatelolco continued as long as it could, the specific commercial activity maintaining itself against the siege's pressure. But the water supply was cut. The chinampa access was controlled. The tribute stopped. The population, compressed by the siege into a smaller and smaller area as the Spanish advance continued from the mainland, was drinking the salt water of the lake. They were eating the specific emergency foods, rats' leather, the bark of trees, that besieged populations eat when their food system has been destroyed. The city fell in August. The destruction was thorough. The buildings were pulled down. The stones were used for the new buildings. The city that replaced Tenochtitlan, Mexico City, was built literally on top of it, using its materials, its site, its geography. The lake was drained over centuries. The chinampas were mostly lost, the channels filled in, the specific agricultural system dismantled. What survives Xochimilco, the specific area to the south of Mexico City where the Chinampa channels still exist, where the flat-bottomed boats still carry tourists through the flower-selling tradition, where a few remaining Chinampa farmers still practice the ancient agriculture. A fragment, but the fragment is there. Let me give you the legacy. Because the legacy of Tenochtitlan's food system is not only historical, it is present. The Chinampas at Xochimilco are UNESCO World Heritage Site. They are also a case study in sustainable agriculture, the specific combination of high productivity, closed-loop nutrient cycling, and multiple crop rotation that the Chinampas represent is being studied by agricultural scientists looking for models for sustainable food production in the 21st century. The specific knowledge that Citlali and her predecessors developed over centuries, the knowledge of how to grow from a lake, how to manage the soil's fertility through organic matter and lake mud, how to produce multiple harvests from the same bed. This knowledge is the subject of academic research, not just as history, as a practical model. The Chinampa is being proposed as a solution to specific agricultural challenges, growing food in marginal environments, maintaining soil fertility without synthetic inputs, managing water efficiently in water-scarce climates. The civilization that built Tenochtitlan was destroyed. The agricultural knowledge it developed is being rediscovered. This is one of the more remarkable intellectual stories of the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the specific recovery of pre-Columbian agricultural knowledge as a resource for the present. And now sleep. You have been in Tenochtitlan for the full duration tonight. In Citlali's canoe before dawn. In the Chinampa mud, the lake-bottom soil in her hands. In the Tlatelolco market, Itzcoatl counting his cacao beans. In the canal system, the specific sounds of a water street city. In the Templo Mayor at dawn, the smoke and the drums. In the tribute arriving from across the empire. In the Pochteca returning from distant regions with cacao and feathers. In the lake at sunset, the volcanoes behind. In the siege, the water cut off, the market failing. In the fall. In the fragments, the Templo Mayor under the streets, the Chinampas at Xochimilco, the food that persisted. The city fed itself for centuries. It fed 200,000 people from a lake. It was extraordinary. It is gone. The food remains. The maize and the beans and the chili and the tomato, still in the kitchen, still on the table, still feeding the people of Mexico City who are standing on the lake bed where Tenochtitlan stood. The city fell. The food survived. Sleep. The lake is mostly drained. The Chinampas are at Xochimilco. The food is still on the table. Good night. Let me give you more of Citlali's world, because I want you to inhabit it more fully. Let me give you her Chinampa in detail. The Chinampa was approximately 30 meters long and 4 meters wide, the specific dimensions that the constraints of canal navigation imposed, long enough to provide significant growing area, narrow enough to allow the canoe access to both long edges. At each corner, a willow tree. The willows were not decorative. The willow roots penetrated deep into the lake bottom and secured the Chinampa against the specific forces that would otherwise erode it, the movement of water in the canals, the occasional wind that disturbed the lake's surface. The willows were the Chinampa's anchor. The soil surface of the Chinampa was approximately 50 centimeters above the water level. Not more, the roots of the crops needed access to the water table, which was at the canal level. The specific moisture management of the Chinampa was not irrigation in the conventional sense. It was capillary action, the water rising from the surrounding canals through the soil, maintaining the constant moisture that the plants required. No irrigation. No water delivery. The water was always there. This was the specific genius of the chinampa design. The crops were surrounded by water but grew in aerated, non-waterlogged soil, their roots reaching down to the moisture without sitting in it. The specific crops on Citlali's chinampa in the spring season. The eastern bed, tomatoes in various stages, the seedlings she had started in the seedbed, the plants from the previous sowing that were beginning to fruit, the mature plants whose production was peak. The central bed, chili peppers, mixed varieties, the specific combinations that the market required, different heat, different flavor, and color for different culinary uses. The western edge, flowers, the specific flowers that the market for ritual offerings required in continuous supply. Marigolds were among them, the specific orange marigold that Mexican death ceremony tradition preserves to this day. The seedbed, along the canal edge, a specific seedbed where new plants were started from seed and raised to transplanting size. The chinampa's production cycle depended on the seedbed, the continuous starting of new plants to replace the ones that had been harvested. She managed all of this simultaneously. The specific simultaneity of chinampa management, multiple crops in different stages of growth, requiring different attention at different times, was one of the organizational challenges that the chinampa farmer managed with the knowledge that came from years of practice. She knew which bed needed attention today. She went to it. She worked. Let me give you the specific market stall. Citlali's spot at the Tlatelolco market was in the flower and vegetable section, the specific area where the chinampa farmers from the southern districts concentrated their stalls. The setup of the market stall, a pedate, a woven reed mat spread on the ground, on which the goods were arranged. The specific arrangement of the tomatoes, the chilies, the flowers, organized by type and quality, the best goods most visible, the pricing communicated through the specific market conventions that everyone in the market knew. The arrival at the market was early. Not just because early arrival meant better placement, though it did, but because the specific market dynamics meant that the first buyers of the day were often the food preparation vendors, the tamale sellers like Itzcoatl, who needed their ingredients before they could begin selling, and these buyers paid the day's best prices because they needed the goods immediately and predictably. Citlali's flowers sold quickly to the offering vendors, the specific commercial category of sellers who bought fresh flowers and sold them to worshippers attending the temple ceremonies. The offering economy around the Templo Mayor and the other temples was significant, and the flowers were its specific material expression. The tomatoes sold throughout the morning. The chilies sold more slowly. The specific market dynamic of chilies was different from tomatoes, the buyers more selective, the variety more important, the negotiation longer. She ate mid-morning, a tamale from one of the food stalls nearby, the specific mid-market meal that the vendors ate when there was a brief break in the buying traffic. By midday, she was largely sold out. She stayed for the afternoon's lighter traffic, selling the last of what she had brought. She began the canoe journey home in the mid-afternoon. Let me give you the tribute system in more detail. Because the tribute that the Aztec Empire extracted from its subject peoples is one of the most documented features of the civilization, and it was one of the primary mechanisms of Tenochtitlan's food supply. The Mendoza Codex, one of the surviving pictographic documents of the Aztec administrative tradition, compiled in the early colonial period from the original tribute records, documents the specific tribute obligations of the approximately 400 tributary towns and provinces of the Aztec Empire. The tribute was paid in specific quantities of specific good on specific schedules. Some towns paid grain, maize, beans, chia, amaranth, in quantities that the document specifies in terms of the specific large containers, the specific measures of the Aztec counting system, that the tribute was measured and delivered in. Some towns paid cloth, the specific standardized lengths of woven cotton that served as a medium of exchange. Some towns paid luxury goods, the specific feathers of specific birds, the quetzal feathers that the Aztec elite prized, jade, turquoise, the specific luxury materials that the Tlatelolco market's high-end section depended on. Some towns paid labor, the specific corvée obligation of sending workers to Tenochtitlan for specific projects. The total tribute flowing into Tenochtitlan was extraordinary. The specific quantities in the Mendoza Codex: 200,000 kilograms of cacao per year, 123,400 bundles of various feathers, 33,680 bales of cloth, and the food, the grain and the processed food products, in quantities that represented a significant portion of the capital's caloric requirements. This was a fiscal state. A complex, organized, documented fiscal state, managing the extraction and distribution of resources from a significant portion of central Mexico. The people who managed this were literate, in the specific pictographic literacy of the Aztec administrative tradition. They counted. They recorded. They organized. The tribute arrived. Tenochtitlan was fed. Let me give you the canoes. Because the canoes were the specific technology that made Tenochtitlan possible, and they deserve their own section. The Aztec canoe tradition, the specific type of dugout canoe that was the primary means of transport on Lake Texcoco and in the canal system, was optimized for the lake environment. The canoes were flat-bottomed, shallow draft vessels suitable for the lake's shallow water. They ranged in size from the small personal canoe used by the chinampa farmer making a morning trip to the market to the large cargo canoes that carried tribute goods and commercial goods across the lake in substantial quantities. The canoe traffic on Lake Texcoco in 1500 was enormous. Multiple Spanish accounts describe arriving by the causeway and looking out across the lake to see hundreds. Some accounts say thousands of canoes on the water at any given time, the specific commercial and personal traffic of a city organized around water transport. The canoe builders were their own professional class. The specific skills of dugout canoe construction, the selection and working of the right wood, the specific tools and techniques of the trade, were a specialized knowledge transmitted through apprenticeship and practice. The canoe was not just transport. It was the city's essential infrastructure. Without the canoe, the chinampa farmer could not reach the chinampa. Without the canoe, the market goods could not move. Without the canoe, the water could not be distributed. Without the canoe, Tenochtitlan could not exist. The canoe was the city. Let me give you the volcanic landscape. Because the Valley of Mexico's geography was not just the lake and the island. It was a volcanic landscape, and the volcanoes were a constant presence in the visual world of Tenochtitlan's inhabitants. Popocatépetl and Ixcuatl. The specific twin volcanoes to the southeast of the Valley of Mexico were visible from Tenochtitlan on clear days. Popocatépetl was, and occasionally still is, actively volcanic. The specific quality of the volcano's smoke, visible from the city on the days when it was active, was part of the visual landscape of the city. The Aztec relationship with the volcanoes was religious as well as physical. The volcanoes were sacred. They were the dwelling places of specific deities, and the ceremonies that addressed them were part of the religious calendar. The volcanoes also had practical significance. The obsidian that came from the volcanic regions was one of the primary tool-making materials of Mesoamerican civilization. The specific sharpness of obsidian tools, sharper than any metal tool of the period, made obsidian the primary material for weapons and cutting tools. Obsidian from the volcanic regions was traded in the Tlatelolco market. The volcano, the obsidian, the market, the city, the food, all connected in the specific geography of the Valley of Mexico. Let me give you the Aztec relationship with insects. Because the insect foods of the Aztec diet, which the Spanish observed with specific astonishment and revulsion, are one of the most interesting aspects of the food system. The specific insects that were consumed in Tenochtitlan. Chapulines, the grasshoppers that are still eaten in Oaxacan cuisine today. Toasted, sometimes seasoned with lime and chili, they were a common food available in the market. Ahuatl, the eggs of the water bug Corixa, harvested from the lake's surface, pressed into cakes, sold in the market. High in protein, a specific distinctive flavor. Larvae of various types, the specific white larvae that are cultivated in the maguey agave plant. These were not exotic or ceremonial foods. They were everyday foods, sold in the market at ordinary prices, consumed as part of the regular diet. The Spanish found this remarkable. Not because insects were unknown as food in Europe. There is a medieval European tradition of eating insects in times of scarcity. But because in Tenochtitlan, insects were everyday food, not emergency food. The insect protein was one of the specific features of the Aztec food system that made it extraordinarily productive. Insects convert food to protein more efficiently than vertebrate animals. The lake's abundant insect life was a free protein source that the Aztec food system had integrated systematically into the diet. The modern argument for insect protein as a sustainable food source is, in some ways, a rediscovery of what Tenochtitlan had worked out 500 years ago. Let me give you the morning at the Templo Mayor. Because the religious life of Tenochtitlan was not separate from the food life. It was embedded in it, and the ceremonies of the Templo Mayor were connected to the food system in specific ways. The Templo Mayor's dual dedication, Huitzilopochtli and Tlatelolco, expressed the two primary concerns of the Aztec agricultural state: the sun and war on one side, rain and agriculture on the other. The ceremonies addressed said to Tlatelolco were specifically oriented around the agricultural calendar. The specific months of the Aztec year that were dedicated to agricultural ceremonies. The planting ceremonies, the first fruit ceremonies, the harvest ceremonies were organized around Tlatelolco and the rain that agriculture required. The priests who maintained the temple. The specific priestly class was one of the primary consumers of the tribute system. The temple complex and its ceremonies required enormous resources. The food for the ceremonies, the materials for the offerings, the maintenance of the temple structures and the priestly households. The food that Citlali grew on her chinampa was, in part, going to the temple. Not directly, not her specific tomatoes going to the Templo Mayor as an offering, but the general tributary and commercial system that the temple's economics were embedded in included the chinampa farmers' production. The temple and the chinampa were connected. The rain that Tlatelolco was asked to provide. The sun that Huitzilopochtli embodied. The chinampa that grew in the rain and the sun. The market that sold what the chinampa grew. The city that was fed. The cycle. Let me give you what Cortés saw. He approached the city on November 8, 1519. He came by the causeway from the south, the Iztapalapa Causeway, which ran straight across the lake to the city. The causeway was wide 8 paces, by his own account, wide enough for 10 horsemen riding abreast. He could see the city growing as he approached. The towers of the temples, the pyramids, the causeways from other directions converging on the island, and the city itself, the density of buildings, the waterways, the canoes on the lake around it. He wrote to Charles V. This great city is built in the lake, and however long you wish to travel by foot or on horseback, you will not find another like it. He was overwhelmed. He was also already calculating. Cortés was not a man who overwhelmed for long. He was a man who surveyed and planned. He saw the city. He saw the causeways that were the city's connection to the mainland. He saw the aqueducts. He understood that the city's vulnerability was its connection to the mainland. Cut the causeways, cut the aqueducts, the island city would be cut off. He filed this away. He entered the city. Moctezuma came to meet him. The encounter was one of the most consequential meetings in the history of the world. It ended badly for everyone. Let me give you the broader historical question. Because the fall of Tenochtitlan raises one of the most debated questions in the history of the Americas. How did a force of approximately 500 Spanish soldiers and their indigenous allies defeat the largest city in the Western Hemisphere? The answers are multiple. Disease was primary. The smallpox epidemic that preceded the siege by a year killed a significant portion of the population. Estimates vary. But the epidemic that swept through Tenochtitlan in 1520 may have killed 20 to 40% of the population, including Moctezuma's successor Cuauhtemoctzin, who had been leading the defense. A population weakened by epidemic disease was a population less capable of military resistance. The Tlaxcalan alliance was significant. The Tlaxcalans, who had maintained independence from the Aztec Empire at considerable cost, had every reason to ally with anyone who would help them destroy Aztec power. The military force that besieged Tenochtitlan was not primarily Spanish. It was primarily Tlaxcalan and other indigenous allies, with the Spanish providing specific military capabilities, iron weapons, horses, gunpowder, that altered the tactical situation. The psychological and political situation within Tenochtitlan was complicated. The Aztec political system was in crisis. The specific uncertainties about Cortés's nature, deity or enemy, the imprisonment of Moctezuma, the political disruption of the siege, all of these factors weakened the defense. And the siege itself, the specific vulnerability of the island city to blockade, which Cortés identified in 1519 and exploited in 1521, was real. A city that fed itself from the lake and the surrounding mainland was catastrophically vulnerable to a force that could control the lake and the causeways. The city fell. These are the reasons. None of them alone is sufficient. All of them together were enough. Sleep now. You have been in Tenochtitlan for the full length of this evening. In Citlali's canoe before dawn, the cold lake air. In the chinampa mud, the specific soil knowledge of someone who has worked the same plot for 20 years. In the market, Itzcoatl's tamales selling, the cacao beans being counted. In the canal system's morning traffic. At the Templo Mayor at dawn. In the tribute arriving. In the Pachteca's return. In the city feeding itself. In Cortés on the causeway, astonished and calculating. In the siege. In the fall. In the fragments that remain. The city fed 200,000 people from a lake. The lake is mostly drained. The city is 20 million people now. It is sinking into the lake bed. The chinampa is at Xochimilco. The food, the maize and the beans and the chili and the tomato and the chocolate, is on the table. The food survived. Sleep. The lake is in the foundations. The city is on the lake. The food is on the table. Good night. Let me give you another character, a different perspective on the same world. A scribe named Tlatelolco. He was 28 years old in 1500. He worked in the administrative offices of the Cuauhtemoctzin that managed one of the eastern quarters of Tenochtitlan. His specific function, maintaining the tribute records. Not the imperial tribute, that was managed by higher officials. The specific local tribute records, the tracking of the obligations that the households in his Cuauhtemoctzin owed to the state in the form of labor, service, and goods, the management of the assignments that rotated these obligations fairly through the community, the specific bookkeeping of a civic administration. He was literate in the pictographic tradition. The specific Aztec writing system, a combination of pictographic and phonetic elements that was understandable to the trained reader, was the tool of his trade. The tribute records were pictographic documents. The goods owed were shown as images, the quantities shown in the specific dot and bar notation of the Aztec number system, the days and months of the payment schedule shown in the calendar notation. He worked with a brush and pigment on bark paper, the specific amatl paper that the administrative tradition used. The colors were the specific colors of the administrative documents, red and black for the primary notation, additional colors for specific categories of information. He worked in the morning when the light was best. After midday, the light in the administrative room diminished, and the specific fine work of the pictographic notation was more difficult. He also maintained a separate responsibility that was more than administrative. He managed the specific records of the Cowpali's ceremonial obligations, the schedule of the ritual performances that the Cowpali's members were responsible for in the calendar of the Templo Mayor. This combination of administrative and ceremonial knowledge was typical of the Aztec scribal class. The administrative and the sacred were not separate domains. They were the same domain, documented in the same script by the same people. He wrote. He counted. He recorded. He was the invisible infrastructure of the civilization, the specific people whose work made the tribute system function and the ceremonial calendar operate. Let me give you the specific flavor profile. Because the food that Tenochtitlan ate had a specific flavor profile, a specific combination of tastes that was distinct from the food traditions of Europe and Asia and Africa. And this flavor profile is one of the things that survived the conquest in the most direct way. The combination. Chili, the specific heat of capsaicin, the compound that the chili pepper produces, which is found nowhere else in the Old World's flavor traditions. The chili is a New World flavor, and its incorporation into cuisines worldwide after the Columbian Exchange changed the flavor profile of world cooking permanently. Tomato, the specific acidity and sweetness of the tomato, another New World food, also not present in Old World cooking before the 16th century. Maize, the specific starchy sweetness of the nixtamalized maize, the flavor that tortillas and tamales are built on. Chocolate, the specific bitterness of cacao, used in the Aztec tradition without sugar, which was not present in Mesoamerica, typically combined with chili and other spices into a complex, bitter, aromatic drink. Vanilla, another New World flavor, used in combination with chocolate in the Aztec tradition. These 5 flavors, chili, tomato, maize, chocolate, vanilla, are the specific flavors of the New World that were introduced to the rest of the world through the contact that began with Columbus and accelerated with the Spanish conquest. They changed world food. Every kitchen in the world that uses chili or tomato or chocolate is using a flavor that came from the specific agricultural tradition that produced the Tlatelolco market. The city fell. The flavors spread. The world eats differently because Tenochtitlan existed. Let me give you the specific experience of the lake at night. Because the lake at night was one of the distinctive sensory experiences of living in Tenochtitlan. The city in 1500 had no electric lighting. What light there was at night came from fires, the household fires, the temple braziers, the specific scattered warm orange of open flame in the darkness. The lake reflected this light. The specific quality of the lake's surface at night, reflecting the scattered fires of the city and its surroundings. The chinampa district's cooking fires, the fires of the mainland settlements, the temple fires, was a visual experience that the city's inhabitants saw every night. The volcanoes were visible at night on clear nights. The specific outline of Popocatépetl and Ixcuatl against the star-filled sky of the high plateau. The stars. At 2,200 meters altitude, with no light pollution, the night sky of the Valley of Mexico was extraordinary. The Milky Way was visible. The specific stars that the Aztec astronomical tradition had named and assigned to the religious calendar were bright and numerous. The Aztec calendar was partly astronomical. The specific positions of the stars and the planets organized the calendar's ceremonial schedule. The people who lived in Tenochtitlan knew the sky. They had to. The calendar was in the stars. The ceremonies were in the calendar. The food was in the ceremonies. The sky and the chinampa were connected. Let me give you the specific sounds of the market. Because the Tlatelolco market had a specific acoustic environment that the observers described, and it is one of the most specific sensory aspects of the place. The crowd noise. 60,000 people in a confined space produce a specific sound. The ambient human noise of many people talking simultaneously, the baseline hum of commercial activity. This noise was what the visitor heard as they approached the market, before the specific calls of the vendors became distinguishable. The vendor calls. The specific calls of the market vendors, the names of their goods, the invitations to inspect, the prices, were the specific commercial sound of the market. Not silent browsing, as a modern supermarket might be, but the active sound of sellers making their goods known. The sound of the grinding. The specific sound of maize being ground on the metate, the flat stone grinder, was present in the market wherever the food preparation vendors were working. The metate and the grinding stone together produced a specific low rhythmic sound, the maize giving way to the stone. The sound of chocolate being prepared. The specific preparation of chocolate in the Aztec tradition involved pouring the liquid between containers to create froth, the specific sound of liquid falling, repeated, the deliberate aeration of the drink. The market was loud. The specific loudness of 60,000 people conducting commerce in an organized space was one of the most striking things about it for the Spanish observers, who found the European markets they knew much quieter. Tlatelolco was alive. Let me give you the mathematics of the food supply. Because the specific mathematics of feeding 200,000 people from a city built on a lake is one of the more interesting aspects of the history, and the numbers are genuinely extraordinary. 200,000 people, eating approximately 2 to 2.5 pounds of food per day each. This means approximately 200,000 to 250,000 pounds of food per day flowing into and being produced within the city. The chinampa system, producing at the rates that the evidence suggests, 3 to 4 crops per year from 9,000 hectares of highly productive land, could produce perhaps a third to a half of this requirement. The balance, tribute from the empire, the market trade from the mainland regions, the lake's own food resources. The specific logistics of delivering this food daily to the city, by canoe primarily, by porter on the causeways, required specific coordination. The canoe traffic was organized. The market days were organized. The tribute delivery was scheduled. 200,000 people. Every day. This was the organizational achievement. Not the pyramid. The pyramid is impressive, but pyramids get built if you have enough organized labor. The food. The daily feeding of 200,000 people from a lake. This was the harder problem. This was what Tenochtitlan solved. Let me give you the specific encounter between Cortés and the market. Because when Cortés and his soldiers first saw the Tlatelolco market, on November 12, 1519, 4 days after their arrival in the city, their reaction was one of the most documented moments of cultural encounter in the history of the Americas. They were taken to the top of the Templo Mayor and shown the view of the city. Then they were taken through the market. Bernal Díaz del Castillo, who was there and who wrote about it 40 years later, described the specific sequence of his impressions. The scale, the size of the market, larger than anything he had seen. The organization, the specific arrangement by product type, the specific sections for different goods. The quality, the specific quality of the goods on display, the variety of the textiles, the variety of the food. The administration, the specific market judges, moving through the market assessing quality and settling disputes. He was astonished. He specifically says he was astonished. He had been in Salamanca, in the markets of Spain. He says Tlatelolco was larger. He says Tlatelolco was more organized. He says Tlatelolco was more varied. A soldier from Spain, in 1519, standing in the market of a city he had come to conquer, says the market was better than anything he had seen in Europe. This is the specific historical record. The market was better. The civilization was more sophisticated. The food system was more innovative. And it was destroyed. This is the specific tragedy of the encounter. Not that a superior force destroyed an inferior one. That an extraordinary civilization was destroyed by a force it astonished. Let me give you one final character. A porter named Cuauhtemoctzin, the eagle that descends, a name that was common enough in the Aztec tradition that we can give it to a character without any particular individual in mind. He was 45 years old. He was not a farmer, not a market vendor, not a scribe. He was a tlamim, a porter, one of the specific professional class of burden carriers that the Aztec economy depended on because the wheel was not used for transportation in Mesoamerica, and large animals suited for hauling were not present. The tlamim carried goods. Everything that moved on land, everything not moved by canoe, was carried by a tlamim. The specific equipment, the tumpline, a head strap or chest strap that transferred the weight of the carried load from the back and shoulders to the head and neck and torso, distributing the weight across the body's strongest structures in a way that allowed for loads that would be impossible with the simple backpack. Trained tlamim could carry remarkable weights over remarkable distances. The specific records suggest loads of 50 to 60 kilograms, more than the carrier's own body weight, in some cases, carried at a pace of approximately 20 to 25 kilometers per day. The tlamim were the specific logistics of the Aztec economy. The tribute that arrived in Tenochtitlan, the goods that moved between the chinampa district and the market, the specific long-distance trade goods that the Pachteca managed, all of it, when it moved on land, moved on the backs of the tlamim. Cuauhtemoctzin carried goods in the chinampa district. The specific route, from the mainland agricultural areas to the southern causeway to the market at Tlatelolco. He carried the produce of farmers who were too far from the canal system to use canoes, the farmers in the higher ground areas around the lake who grew food for the market, but whose land was not accessible by water. He walked. He carried. He delivered. He returned. His feet knew the causeways. He knew the weight of the load by feel. He was 45 years old, and his body showed it, the specific wear of 45 years of carrying heavy loads, the strength and the specific damage that such a life produced. He was essential. He was invisible in the records. He carried the city's food. He went home. He slept. He did it again tomorrow. The food system of Tenochtitlan was not one person. It was Citlali on the chinampa and Itzcoatl at the tamale stall, and Tlatelolco with the tribute records and Cuauhtemoctzin with the tumpline and the Pachteca on their long journeys, and the canoe builders, and the market judges, and the priests at the Templo Mayor who connected the rain and the sun to the food through the ceremony. It was all of them. 200,000 people. Fed every day. From a lake. Sleep. The lake is in the foundations. The city is on the lake. The food is on the table. The maize, the beans, the chili, the tomato, the chocolate, still there. Good night. Let me give you the specific day of a market judge. Because the market judges, the specific officials who maintain the commercial order of Tlatelolco, are one of the more interesting administrative features of the market, and their daily experience illuminates what the market's administration actually looked like. A market judge named Ixcuina, named for one of the textile deities, which suggests her family had a textile connection, was 40 years old in 1500. She had been a market judge for 8 years. Yes, she. The market judges at Tlatelolco included women, which reflects the specific role of women in Aztec commercial life more broadly. She arrived at the market before the main trading began. Her responsibility: to move through the market in the section she was assigned, the food and agricultural section, assessing the goods, the measures, the weights, the behavior of the vendors. The specific assessments she made: the quality of goods. A vendor representing dried fish as of a certain quality was subject to her inspection. If the fish was of inferior quality, the representation was fraudulent. Fraud was subject to specific penalties. The measures and weights. The specific measures used for grain and other bulk goods were standardized. A vendor using a short measure was committing fraud. She checked measures. Not all of them, there were too many, but selectively, frequently enough that the vendor's new inspection was possible. The behavior: a vendor physically blocking another vendor's access to customers, a vendor spreading false information about a competitor's goods, the specific commercial misconduct that markets generated, she addressed it. She also adjudicated disputes. When a buyer and a seller disagreed about a transaction, the buyer claiming the goods were misrepresented, the seller claiming the goods were as described, they could appeal to the market judge. She heard both sides. She decided. Her decisions were binding. They were not always satisfying to both parties. She made them anyway. She walked her section of the market. She assessed. She decided. She was, in the specific sense of an official whose function was the maintenance of a specific kind of justice in a specific context, one of the people who made the market work. Without the market judges, the market would have been a place where the strong cheated the weak, and the reputation of the market's goods would have declined, and the buyers would have gone elsewhere, and the market would have contracted. Because of the market judges, the market was trusted. Because the market was trusted, it grew. Because the market grew, the city was fed. The judge and the chinampa farmer, and the tamale vendor and the porter were all connected. Let me give you the chocolate. Because chocolate deserves its own section. Chocolate in Tenochtitlan was not the sweet confection of the modern world. It was not sweet. It was bitter, the specific bitterness of cacao beans ground and prepared without sugar, and it was mixed with other flavors including chili, vanilla, and various aromatic spices. It was consumed as a drink. The specific preparation: cacao beans were ground on the metate, the resulting paste mixed with water, and the mixture poured between vessels to create froth. The froth was considered the most desirable part of the drink. The specific pouring was a skilled preparation. Chocolate was associated with status. The cacao bean was currency. The drink made from cacao was expensive. It was consumed by the elite. It was also available commercially in the Tlatelolco market. The specific status of chocolate in Aztec culture: currency, luxury drink, ritual offering, commercial good, made it one of the most complexly positioned foods in the food system. It was not simply a food. It was an economic and ritual object that was also consumed. The Pachteca who brought cacao from the lowland regions, where it grew, were supplying not only a food but a currency and a ritual material. When the Spanish arrived, they found the chocolate. They didn't immediately like it. The bitter, chili-spiced, unsweetened version was different from anything in their flavor vocabulary. Over the following decades, as cacao made its way to Europe and was combined with sugar, the specific transformation of Aztec Ixcuatl into European chocolate happened. The world now drinks approximately 3.5 million metric tons of chocolate per year. All of it tracing back to the cacao that Citlali and Itzcoatl and Ixcuina were trading in the Tlatelolco market. The currency, the ritual object, the world's most loved confection. Let me give you the specific size comparison one more time. Because the size of Tenochtitlan relative to contemporary European cities is one of the historical facts that most changes how you think about the civilization. London in 1500, 50,000 people. Seville in 1500, the largest Spanish city, 45,000 to 60,000 people. Cortés was from Extremadura. His home region's largest city was probably a few thousand people. He walked into a city of 200,000. And the city was clean. The Spanish observers noted this specifically. The city was clean. The specific comparison they made. Tenochtitlan was cleaner than the Spanish cities they knew. The canal system that served as streets was cleaned regularly. 1,000 workers per day sweeping the main streets, by some accounts. The waste management system, the canoes that collected human waste and delivered it to the chinampas, meant that the waste was not accumulating in the streets. The market had specific cleaners who maintained the market area. The city of 200,000 people on a lake was cleaner than the cities of 50,000 in Europe. This is the specific historical record. The civilization the Spanish encountered was, in specific measurable ways, more sophisticated than the civilization they came from. The food system, the market, the sanitation, the city management. They destroyed it anyway. History does not reward the most sophist. Itzcoatl civilization. It rewards the civilization with the most effective weapons and the most fortunate diseases. The Spanish had both. And now the very final close. The lake, the island, the city, the chinampa, the market, the canoe, the pyramid, the scribe, the porter, the judge, the chocolate, the tamale, the maize, all of it feeding 200,000 people. All of it gone in 2 years. All of it in the food on the table tonight. The maize that becomes the tortilla. The tomato that becomes the salsa. The chili that burns the tongue. The chocolate that sweetens the world. Tenochtitlan is in the kitchen. Sleep. The lake is in the foundations. The city is on the lake. The food is on the table. Good night. Thank you for tonight. Tenochtitlan deserves more attention than it gets, and the specific achievement of its food system deserves to be known as the specific achievement it was. Subscribe if dull tales is your evening company. Leave a comment, tell me if you've been to Mexico City, if you've been to Xochimilco, if you've eaten chapulines. Next time, the Victorian servants upstairs and downstairs in the great houses of Victorian England. But tonight, Tenochtitlan, the lake, the chinampa, the market, the city built on water that fed itself. Good night. Let me give you the specific cultural knowledge that the Aztec administrative class maintained. Because the Aztec scribal and administrative class was maintaining not just fiscal records but an entire intellectual tradition, and that tradition was as sophisticated as anything in the contemporary world. The Aztec astronomers. The specific calendar system that the Aztec civilization had inherited and refined was one of the most precise pre-telescopic astronomical systems in the world. The 365-day solar calendar was accurate. The 260-day ritual calendar was precise. The 52-year cycle that resulted from their interaction was a specific mathematical achievement that required systematic astronomical observation over generations. The Aztec astronomers tracked the Venus cycle with remarkable precision. The specific period of Venus's appearance as morning and evening star was incorporated into the calendar with an accuracy that later analysis has confirmed. They tracked the sun's solstices and equinoxes. They tracked the Pleiades, the rising of the Pleiades on the specific night of the new fire ceremony. The ceremony that began each 52-year cycle was the specific astronomical event around which one of the most important religious ceremonies was organized. This was not primitive skywatching. This was systematic, long-term, recorded astronomical observation. The scribes who maintained the calendar records were doing something recognizable as a form of science. The knowledge lived in the records. The records were pictographic documents. The documents burned. Most of them burned, either in the conquest itself or in the subsequent colonial period when the Spanish authorities, suspicious of the religious and intellectual content of the Aztec books, organized the burning of as many as could be found. Some survived. The Codex Mendoza, the Matricula de Tributos, the Codex Borgia, the Florentine Codex, compiled by the Franciscan friar Sahagun from indigenous informants in the decades after the conquest. These are the surviving fragments of the intellectual tradition. The full tradition is gone. The calendar is not gone. The specific system persists, maintained by communities in Oaxaca and other parts of Mexico who have preserved the ritual calendar continuously from before the conquest to the present. The knowledge survived. In the communities. Not in the books. Let me give you the women weavers. Because the Aztec textile tradition was one of the most sophisticated in the pre-Columbian Americas, and it was primarily a women's tradition, and it was embedded in the food system in specific ways. The cloth, the quachli, that served as a medium of exchange was woven by women. The specific textile work of the Aztec tradition, cotton cloth, but also maguey fiber cloth for everyday use, and the specific feather work that combined weaving and feather arrangement into a luxury good that was among the most prized products of Mesoamerican craft. The backstrap loom. The specific weaving technology of the Aztec tradition was the backstrap loom, a loom where one end of the warp threads was tied to a tree or post, and the other end was attached to a strap around the weaver's back, the tension of the weaving maintained by the weaver leaning back against the strap. The backstrap loom produces cloth of the specific width determined by the span of the weaver's arms, typically around half a meter. The quachli was a standardized length of cotton cloth made on the backstrap loom. Its standardization was part of what made it usable as currency. The specific standard dimensions, maintained consistently across the production of thousands of weavers, made the cloth a reliable medium of exchange. The women who wove the quachli were the women who manufactured the currency. The specific connection between women's weaving labor and the commercial system's functioning is one of the aspects of the Aztec economy that the conventional narrative of the conquest, which focuses on the warriors and the emperors, tends to obscure. Let me give you the agriculture beyond the chinampa. Because the chinampa was the most distinctive feature of the Aztec food system, but it was not the only form of agriculture that fed Tenochtitlan. The mainland surrounding the lake was cultivated. The specific highland agriculture of the Valley of Mexico used several techniques. Terracing, the construction of agricultural terraces on the hillsides surrounding the valley, extending the cultivatable area into the slopes. The cultivation of the maguey agave, which was not a food crop in the primary sense but produced several valuable products, pulque, the fermented beverage, fiber for cloth and cordage, and fuel, the dried leaves. The maguey was one of the most useful plants in the Mexican highland environment. Hunting and gathering supplementing the agricultural production, the deer and the rabbit, and the various game animals of the highland environment, the specific wild plants gathered from the non-cultivated areas. The specific combination of the chinampa agriculture in the Lake District, the highland agriculture on the surrounding slopes, the hunting and gathering in the undeveloped areas, the tribute from distant regions, and the market trade that connected all of these. This was the full food system. Not a single technology. A portfolio. The portfolio's diversity was one of its specific strengths. If the chinampas failed a drought year, a specific pest problem, the tribute and the mainland agriculture could compensate. If the tribute was disrupted, a political crisis in the empire, the chinampa and the market could compensate. The diversification was resilience. Let me give you one more morning. The morning that Citlali has been woken for 6 years in the same way, by the same cool lake air, by the same sounds from the canal. She is 32 years old. She has been working this chinampa for 12 years, since she married and moved to the chinampa district with her husband, who also worked the chinampa and who was, on this morning, still asleep. She goes to the chinampa without waking him. She is more efficient in the morning without him. Not because she doesn't love him, she does, in the specific practical way of people who have worked alongside each other for 12 years and who trust each other's judgment and know each other's habits. But because the morning chinampa work was something she had learned to do on a specific schedule that his slightly different pace disrupted. She was better alone in the morning. He knew this. He slept. She paddled. The specific physical act of paddling the canoe in the morning, the rhythm, the specific muscle engagement, the way the body learned to manage the paddle over years of daily practice, was one of the automatic activities of her morning, something that required almost no conscious thought, and that left the mind free to think about other things. She thought about the chinampa. The specific question of the morning, what was ready, what needed attention, what should go to the market today. She arrived. She assessed. She harvested. The specific hands in the specific soil. The knowledge in the hands. She loaded the canoe. She paddled back. She prepared for the market. This is the morning. This is the life. This is the specific daily existence of one of the people who fed Tenochtitlan. One more thing. Let me give you the afterlife of the chinampa. Because the chinampa at Xochimilco today is not merely a tourist attraction. It is a living agricultural system. Some of the chinampas at Xochimilco are still actively farmed. The specific soil, the specific water, the specific canal access agriculture still happening, still producing food. The farmers who work the Xochimilco chinampas today are the inheritors, sometimes in the most literal genetic and cultural sense, of the tradition that Citlali practiced. They grow flowers, they grow vegetables, they work the same specific soil that has been producing crops for 5 centuries. They know the canal by the feel of the paddle. They know which beds are producing well. They know what the market needs. The knowledge persisted. It persisted through the conquest, through the colonial period, through the draining of the lake, through the growth of Mexico City from a colonial capital to a metropolitan area of 20 million people. The chinampa persisted at Xochimilco. The knowledge persisted in the people. The food persisted in the kitchen. This is what survives Cadaster. Life. Not always the monuments. The knowledge. The food. The hands. Sleep. Citlali's hands are gone. The knowledge in them persists. Good night. Let me give you the specific Aztec relationship with flowers. Because flowers appear repeatedly in what we know about Tenochtitlan, in Citlali's chinampa, in the market, in the offering economy, and the Aztec relationship with flowers was one of the more aesthetically interesting features of the civilization. The Aztecs grew flowers. In a city that needed to feed 200,000 people, in a food system under constant productive pressure, the chinampa farmers grew flowers. Not only food. Flowers. The specific flowers that appear in the market records and the tribute records, marigolds, which are associated with the dead in Mexican tradition to this day. A variety of other flowering plants whose specific identities the records document, and the specific ornamental flowers that the elite households used to decorate their residences. The Aztec gardens, the floating gardens, and the specific gardens of the palace complexes and the elite residences were noted by the Spanish observers for their beauty. The specific design of the Aztec garden was not the formal European garden. It was a different aesthetic, organized around different principles. The flower market at Tlatelolco was a significant commercial sector. The flowers sold were going to the temple offerings, the specific ritual importance of flowers in the ceremony, the elite households, the decoration of residences and persons, the everyday personal adornment that Aztec culture practiced, flowers worn in the hair, flowers carried in the hand. A civilization that grew flowers for aesthetic enjoyment and personal adornment in the middle of a food production system that was under constant pressure is a civilization that had specific ideas about what life was for. Not only food. Beauty. Let me give you Moctezuma's garden. Because Moctezuma II, the Aztec emperor, maintained specific gardens that the Spanish observers described with particular admiration. The gardens at Texcoco, the royal gardens of the Aztec rulers, were among the most elaborate garden complexes in the Americas. The Spanish accounts describe botanical gardens in the modern sense, organized collections of plants from different regions, maintained for study and for aesthetic pleasure. Medicinal plants in one section, ornamental plants in another. Aviaries, with birds from the different ecological zones of the empire. Zoos with animals from the different ecological zones, jaguars, pumas, snakes, the specific animals of the New World that the Aztec rulers collected. The gardens at the palace complex in Tenochtitlan were smaller but still significant. The specific plants of the highland and lowland zones of Mexico, collected and maintained in the palace gardens. The flowers. Always the flowers. This is a civilization that built botanical gardens. 500 years before European botanical gardens became standard civic institutions, the Aztec Empire was collecting plants systematically, maintaining them in organized collections, studying their properties. The knowledge that the Aztec medical tradition accumulated about the properties of the plants in those gardens was significant. The specific pharmacological knowledge of the Mesoamerican medical tradition was one of the intellectual resources that the conquest destroyed partially and preserved partially. Some of the specific plants of Aztec medicine are now mainstream pharmaceuticals. Some are still known only in traditional medicine. Some are lost. And now the final closing. You have been in Tenochtitlan for a long time tonight. In Citlali's canoe before dawn, and in her chinampa mud, and in her tomatoes and her chilies and her flowers. In Itzcoatl's tamale stall, the cacao beans counted. In Tlatelolco's administrative records, the tribute documented. In Cuauhtemoctzin's back, the tumpline bearing the weight. In Ixcuina's market rounds, the measures checked. In the 60,000 people at Tlatelolco. In the chocolate. In the insects. In the canal system's morning. In the Templo Mayor at dawn. In the volcanoes on the horizon. In Cortés on the causeway, astonished. In the siege. In the fall. In the fragments, the Xochimilco chinampas, the Templo Mayor Museum, the food on every table. The city fed itself. 200,000 people. From a lake. Using technologies that the European world had not imagined. In a civilization that was astonishing enough to astonish the people who destroyed it. The city is gone. The food is on the table. The knowledge is in the hands of the people who still farm the Xochimilco chinampas. The maize and the beans and the chili and the tomato and the chocolate are in your kitchen. Tenochtitlan is in your kitchen. Sleep. The lake is in the foundations. The city is on the lake. Food is on the table. Good night. Let me give you one last thing. The current state of the Templo Mayor. The Templo Mayor, the great twin pyramid at the center of Tenochtitlan, was demolished in 1521. Its stones were used to build the colonial city. The Cathedral of Mexico City stands adjacent to what was the Templo Mayor's location. The ruins were rediscovered in 1978. A construction crew working on the subway expansion encountered the ruins beneath the streets of the old colonial city, at the corner of what is now Guatemala Street and Argentina Street in the historic center of Mexico City. The excavation that followed was one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in the history of the Americas. The Templo Mayor was there. Under the streets. Under 4 centuries of colonial and independent Mexican history. The ruins were excavated. A museum was built beside the ruins. The Templo Mayor Museum opened in 1987. It contains the specific objects that archaeologists found in the temple's deposits, the offerings, the statues, the specific material culture of the Aztec ceremonial life that the conquest had tried to destroy. The offerings included the skulls of sacrificed individuals, the specific, difficult, unavoidable evidence of the human sacrifice that was a genuine feature of Aztec religious practice, the specific large stone disc depicting the dismembered body of the moon goddess Cuauhtemoctzin, one of the most striking archaeological objects in the world, found in 1978 and now the central display of the Templo Mayor Museum. The beautiful objects and the disturbing objects are in the same museum. Because the civilization that produced the chinampa and the Tlatelolco market and the botanical gardens and the flowers also practiced human sacrifice on a significant scale. This is the specific complexity of the historical record. The civilization was extraordinary in multiple dimensions, and some of those dimensions are admirable and some are not, and the full picture requires holding all of them simultaneously. The chinampa is extraordinary. The human sacrifice happened. Both are true. Holding both is what honest history requires. The museum is there. The ruins are there. The food is on the table. Sleep. Good night. Let me give you the specific numbers of the tribute one more time. Because the tribute arriving in Tenochtitlan is one of the most concrete expressions of what the city was and what it required. From the Mendoza Codex and similar sources, the annual tribute to Tenochtitlan included approximately 7,000 metric tons of maize, 3,000 metric tons of beans, 4,000 metric tons of chia, 4,000 metric tons of amaranth, 200,000 kilograms of cacao, 2 million cotton mantles of various types, plus the luxury goods, feathers, gold, jade, amber, turquoise, rubber, paper, incense, plus the labor tribute, the specific obligation of subject communities to provide workers for the construction and maintenance projects of the empire. These numbers, imprecise, based on translations and interpretations of the pictographic records, represent the specific scale of the Aztec tribute system's extraction. The maize alone, 7,000 metric tons per year. For reference, 7,000 metric tons of maize would feed approximately 35,000 to 40,000 people for a year at the basic nutritional requirement. The tribute was not the totality of the food supply. The chinampa production and the market trade were also significant, but the tribute was substantial. The empire extracted resources. The capital consumed them. This is how empires work. The Aztec Empire was not unique in this. The Roman Empire did the same thing. The British Empire did the same thing. The scale and the mechanism vary. The structure is recognizable. The city at the center is fed. The periphery provides. Sleep. The numbers are in the codices. The codices are in the museums. The museums are in Mexico City. Mexico City is on the lake. The lake is in the foundations. The food is on the table. Tenochtitlan fed itself. And then it fed the world. The maize, the beans, the chili, the tomato, the chocolate, still feeding, still on the table. Tonight, good night. One final thing. Let me give you the specific sensation of eating a tortilla. You have probably eaten a tortilla. You may not have thought about where it came from. It came from nixtamalized maize processed in the alkaline solution that the Mesoamerican agricultural tradition developed to make the maize fully nutritious. The specific smell of the nixtamalization process, the lime and the maize cooking together, is the smell that Citlali's kitchen produced every morning. The specific texture of the fresh tortilla, the pliability, the slight roughness of the stone ground texture, the specific flatness that the griddle produces. This is the texture that the people of Tenochtitlan knew as their daily bread. The specific flavor of the fresh tortilla, the corn sweetness, the slight smokiness from the griddle. This is the flavor that Itzcoatl used as the wrapper for his tamale fillings, that Citlali ate for breakfast before paddling to the chinampa, that the market judge Ixcuina ate at her midday break. The tortilla is the most direct sensory connection to Tenochtitlan that you can have. You can eat it. You can feel in the texture of the tortilla between your fingers, a faint echo of the hand that ground the maize on the metate in a kitchen, beside a lake on a high plateau in Mexico 500 years ago. The sensation is not the same, but it is the same food, the same grain, the same process, the same result. The city that built itself on a lake to feed 200,000 people fed the world. It is still feeding you. Sleep. The tortilla is in the kitchen. The lake is in the foundations. The city is on the lake. Tenochtitlan is on the table. Good night. And for real, the last word. The lake is mostly drained. Mexico City is sinking into it. The Templo Mayor is under the streets. The chinampa is at Xochimilco. The market was at Tlatelolco, which is now a public square with a different history attached to it. The Plaza de las Tres Culturas, the square of three cultures, where the student massacre of 1968 happened, which is another story for another night. The food is on the table. The food is the most continuous thread. The food is what persists. When the city falls, the food survives. When the empire falls, the food survives. When the language changes and the calendar changes and the gods change and the buildings are replaced, the food survives. Maize, beans, chili, tomato, chocolate, vanilla. These are Tenochtitlan's gift to the world. Not the pyramids, those are ash. Not the codices, most of those are ash. Not the empire, that is ash. The food. The food is the gift. The food is the legacy. The food is what you eat tonight. Sleep. Good night.